Education Division here at the Game and Parks Commission. And as Monica talked a little bit earlier, we're a fairly new division at the commission. We started, June of 2000 or July of 2019. And I took my position as the division administrator in January of 2020, right before things hit the fan with COVID. So it was spring was an interesting time for our team, but I think that we really have pulled together and done some fantastic things. Interestingly enough, at that January time, we also, as an agency, an overall agency, we adopted a new education strategic plan. So I am going to share my screen with you all here. There we go. So today I'm going to chat with you a little bit about our education strategic plan and what it is and why we developed it and how we developed it, and then what exactly is involved in the education strategic plan. So if any of you are familiar with the Game and Parks Commission, we have an overall agency-wide strategic plan, and it is called Focus on the Future. So it makes sense then that our education-specific strategic plan would be called Focus on Education. And in fact, that is what it is called. So real quick, we wanted to talk a little bit about, when we were talking about this education strategic plan, is have a moment of chatting and thinking about what is education, and then what is interpretation, and then at some point what is outreach and what is marketing, and certainly there's this overlapping that is involved in all of those, but there are subtle differences that become really important. So when we look at what is education, it is really the passing of facts or skills or the way we do things, a develop an understanding from one group to another. So we could say it's from one generation to the next. We could say it's from experts to non-experts. So it's really just that passing of information. It provides information, but rarely does quality education ever form that connection to the person. It's really important. I mean, education is absolutely critical for a well-informed citizenry. So little thinking about how is it important when you go to the grocery store and you need somebody to count back change. It's really important that they have been educated on math concepts and looking at making change and how that works. When we talk about the scientific process, there is really a right way and a wrong way to do it. And so there is, sometimes we can make that connection, but really as a whole, there's just the information of how do we do math or how do you read, and that information becomes important. There's really a right way and a wrong way to load a muzzle loader or identify birds. And so there's that education that goes along with it. That said, then there's interpretation, and interpretation, yes, is passing on that information, but it's also providing this emotional or this intellectual connection to the topic. So for example, this is when we look at brain science, this is when we might ask our audience, or as an educator, I might talk to the constituents or the audience that I'm working with and say, okay, does anybody ever own a dog? Okay, yeah, so let's think about our dog and what is it that your dog does when we go on a walk? And I'm asking them to pull memories from their brain, and then I'm going to connect those memories to talking about a fox or a coyote, or I might do that when we are talking about scats and tracks. So it is making that connection to their previous knowledge. It's making that connection to an emotion that they might have. So talking about their favorite fishing hole and going fishing with their grandparents. And then why is water quality important? Well, because if you want to have that positive memory and that moment again, we have to have good water quality in that fishing hole, right? Or identifying the birds in the backyard and understanding how those birds are really important. And so even though I saw a sharp-shinned hawk sitting on the branch right near my bird feeder the other day, understanding that although I love watching the birds, that sharp-shinned hawk is actually really important because it's population control of those birds. So it's taking really this scientific knowledge and making a connection to my love of watching birds out my kitchen window. So that is a little bit of the difference between education and interpretation. It should be noted that interpretation is really important to what we are doing here at the Game and Parks Commission, and from an environmental education or a ecological education, and really truthfully to that skills-based education. Why? Because positive social interactions and memories are going to make us want to do it again. So the whole point of getting people to be comfortable in the outdoors and loving being in the outdoors and understanding what they're seeing is so that they do it again, so that we develop this citizenry that wants to be in the out of doors. Interpretation makes that connection. And from a Game and Parks perspective, and certainly we can look at things from a broader perspective. So we can look at things not just from a Game and Parks perspective of what we are doing here, but we can look at a broader perspective of all environmental education or all outdoor recreation education. It makes it relevant. So part of my job at the Game Commission is to make sure that what I am doing and what we as an agency are doing are ensuring that nature is relevant to the public, that outdoor recreation is relevant to the public, and that the Game Commission is relevant to the public. And that's really where good quality education and really interpretation come in. So when we start to talk about this agency and the Game and Parks Commission and our vision as a whole, and then interpretation over here, and how do they meld together? Well, what we are trying to do is a strong understanding. So we want to see our constituents have a strong understanding of those science principles. We want them to have a strong understanding of the skills, like how to go fishing or how to go hunting safely. We want them to have a basic understanding, and then we want them to have an appreciation. So whether that appreciation is for bees, and that's totally legit, we do want them to have an appreciation for bees, or for birds, or maybe that we want them to have an appreciation for clean water or clean air. But we also want them to have an appreciation for our park areas and the opportunities that exist because we have such a fantastic state park and state rec areas. And then we want them to be appreciative of our recreation opportunities, whether that be on public or private land. We have lots of recreation opportunities in our state, so we want them to appreciate that. And then we want to have support for stewardship. So it's one thing to understand our natural resources and appreciate them, but if they support, that means that they are starting to take some actions and they are starting to think differently about the natural resources or outdoor recreation opportunities. And then finally, we want to lead them on this little journey from understanding to appreciation, to support, to finally being engaged on a regular basis. We want them actively participating, whether that means participating in conservation and creating a pollinator garden in their backyard, or even just planting some milkweeds or sedum or whatever it happens to be. Or maybe we want them to be an active grouse hunter. And so we want people, whatever their passion is, we want them to be actively engaged. So that is when we start talking about Game and Parks Commission and how we want to lead people on this journey. And in order to get somebody to be actively engaged, we need to take them on this journey, which education and interpretation is critical to that. So we started thinking about what currently does the Game and Parks Commission do? What are we currently doing for education? And we really started dividing this up into 3 different categories. We have outdoor recreation. So whether that be hiking, kayaking, canoeing, it could be boating, it could be hunting, it could be fishing, bird watching, whatever it happens to be, it's outdoor recreation. And then we have cultural and historical education because shockingly, a lot of people don't know that the Game and Parks Commission is responsible for running our state historical parks, and we are charged with conserving a lot of our cultural heritage in the state of Nebraska. And so we definitely take part in historical and cultural education. And then we have our natural resources education, more that science education, that ecological education that is providing not only that connection, but that really solid body of knowledge. So we started thinking, okay, well, what does the Game and Parks Commission do? And gosh, we're doing a lot. When it comes to skills-based education, we have fishing and community fishing. We have our outdoor discovery programs and our expos. We have our park naturalist program. We have mentored hunts. We have trap shoots. gosh, we have a ton of different stuff. When it comes to historical and cultural education, we have a ton of living history and reenactments, demonstrations. I will say that my kids love going to the natural history or the living history and learning how rope is made, which sounds really basic. And sometimes on the surface, we're like, that's ridiculous, but it's not, because this was important to our culture, to our ancestors. That was important, is having a quality rope. And honestly, the way you make the rope is how it curves. And there's all kinds of knowledge there that we are not necessarily getting anywhere else other than in our historical parks. And then when we talk about our natural resource, our ecological education, we certainly have Project Wild and the suite of wild programs. We have Trout in the Classroom, we have Trail Tales, we have Pollinator Week and Bird Month, curriculum development. We have a ton of stuff. And that sounds really great. God, look at all the stuff that we are doing. But we really started thinking as far as where do we go? What do we do? And it really became evident that we needed to grow strategically. So growing education and growing interpretation is really important, in my opinion. But it really needs to be strategic. We can't just grow willy-nilly, because it's not going to be effective. We need to work more collaboratively. So as we grow education, not only within the Game and Parks Commission, but also within the state of Nebraska, as we grow environmental education, it's really good if we can work collaboratively and say, okay, you're doing this, so then I'm going to do this over here, and they're going to work together. And then how do we meet the changing needs of our constituents? Because if we start to look at Nebraska's demographics, they're changing. And even if the demographics aren't necessarily changing, the demands of the public are changing. So what people are expecting are changing. So we started out with an education work group in 2017. This really was just a small group of the overall educators that we had overall in the agency. And the idea was to get together and start fleshing out some of these ideas and start having good conversations. We began in January of 2019. So not even, yeah, I guess that should be, January of 2019. Wow, that seems crazy to me. But January of 2019, we started out with this big group, and we got the division administrators and work group members. And we looked at all of this, and we came up with a strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats assessment, a SWOT assessment, which we'll talk a little bit more in a second. And we did brainstorming, and we took all of these ideas and we wrote it down, and we did small group writing sessions. So a smaller group of us got together for 3, 4, 5 months. And we really started, we were meeting almost weekly for half day, whole day sessions of brainstorming and thinking about this and how does this work and how would we put this giant plan together. And once we had that, what we thought was good, we took it back to the larger group, and then we took it to administration, and we made changes, and we went back and forth, and then we made it really pretty with graphics design, because what plan doesn't need a little graphics design to spice it up a little bit. And then in January of 2020, this the education strategic plan, my copy right here, focus on education, was formally adopted by the Game and Parks Commission. So that's the process that we went through to get this document created. But like I said, it really started out with looking at what are our challenges and then what are our strengths and opportunities. And we looked at this in a multitude of different ways. We looked at it internally. So inside this agency, what are our challenges? And then what are our strengths that we have within this agency? And then externally, so in the community, in the state, in the nation, what are our challenges? And then what are our opportunities? And there's a couple that to me just stand out. Some of the challenges internally is a lack of coordination. We had a ton of different educators doing really phenomenal things, but it wasn't necessarily in coordination. And that means that we just weren't working as strategically as we could be. And we had a lack of planning and evaluation, and that becomes important because we want to make sure that our programs are doing what we set out to do. That said, we have this crazy passionate education staff. Like, I've never met people that are so incredibly passionate and skilled at their jobs. And we have this supportive administration. We have existing programs that are phenomenal. We have these partnerships that we are recognized on a national level for having these partnerships, because Nebraska has set the bar with having high quality, strong partnerships that work collaboratively. They truly work collaboratively together. When we look externally, we do have some challenges. We know that people are disconnected with the outdoors. Like, that's not a shock. We've known that, but it is a challenge. It does create some issues for us. And then we have those changing demographics, which I think we can look at as a challenge, and it is, because that means that we're not going to be able to do things the same way that we've always been doing things, but it can also be an opportunity, or something, a positive, in that we can start looking at things differently and given the opportunity to grow and do different things. Externally, we have this crazy demand for more education. People are demanding education, and lots of varieties of education, lots of different topics, and lots of different ways to develop and provide those resources. And then we hope there's potential for future funding, whether that comes in the form of RAWA, the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, or how that is pushed through on a federal level. We are still hopeful that that potential is there, and that would be a game changer as far as what we're able to do. So with this education, we created a vision for what education would be at the Game and Parks Commission. And I'll highlight a couple of things. We wanted to have a leadership role, right? So we wanted to be the leader. We wanted to say where we want to step up, and we want to help provide some leadership for this. We wanted to focus on those three different types of education: ecological, cultural, and outdoor recreation. We really wanted to focus on our diverse communities, because our constituents are all of Nebraskans, and we want to make sure that we are reaching all Nebraskans. We want that appreciation and that knowledge. We want that understanding, support, and participation in outdoor recreation. So from that vision, from those input sessions, from that SWOT assessment, we created the Education Focus on Education Strategic Plan. It is a 5-year strategic plan. I want to point out a couple of things. This is agency-wide. So although we have this new education division, this plan is not for the education division. This is for the entire Game and Parks Commission. It focuses on all aspects of education, both currently what we are doing and what we can or future doing. And then we looked at things internally, and we looked at things externally. So we looked at this, and this plan looks at things from multiple perspectives and comes up with strategies and goals to achieve those multiple perspectives.
3 minutes, Lindsay.
Thank you. There are 6 different sections of the plan: natural resources education, historical and cultural education, outdoor recreation education. Those, like I talked about, we've been talking about throughout this whole thing. But then we have this strong education team, and we really wanted to focus on our staff and how we can work together to be a stronger team. And then partnerships: how can we not only maintain our current partnerships, but expand our partnerships? And then whatever the source of funding is, we need to be prepared for what is the funding, how are we going to strategically plan for it. There's numerous recommendations in this plan, but a couple of the immediate recommendations are: develop a baseline knowledge. So we want to assess our current communities, who they are, what they want or what they need from the commission, and how what we're doing does or does not meet those needs. We want to look at our current programs and just develop this matrix or this inventory of them, and conduct an evaluation of our current education programs. We want to further and develop our effective existing programs, while at the same time develop new programs or new plans. So looking at, honestly, at one point we talked about having a plan for the plan, and then we really decided that with the team we have here, we're just forging forward, and we don't have a plan to implement the plan, because honest to goodness, we are already implementing the plan. We want to assess the impacts of development of new positions. So what are those job titles, and how are we able to use those job titles? Do we need more staff? I instantly would say, yes, of course we need new staff. But first we need to pause and say, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And what staff do or don't we need to be able to do that? And then look at our partners, and how do we not only, like I mentioned, keep them or develop new partnerships, maintain and develop new. And then look at our education resources currently as far as income and expenditures and how we are strategically spending those money. And then look at some of those funding that we are currently doing and how can they be utilized in the future to match funds. I think that the most important thing that I want to get across is that the product of this document is not the document. It's really the strategic and sustainable programming that we are going to be able to develop from this, leading to that conservation-minded citizenry that is appreciative of our natural and cultural resources and actively involved in it. That's the goal, not a document, not a piece, not a booklet. The goal is this this engaged citizenry, and that's all I have.
Do we have any questions for Lindsay? And if